In this video, we're going to talk about how to prepare your materials, choose your specific quotes, and write an outline for your comparative essay. So first, you should write your thesis statement. I've already reviewed this in another video that I will have linked in the comments for this YouTube video. And in this case, I'm going to be working off of an example comparative thesis statement. I have the link for the story text to this story here on the screen if you're interested. It's a very short 2-page long story by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. So here's the example thesis I have. This is going to have, the first sentence is going to be a point of similarity. My second sentence is a point of difference. And the third sentence, which I've underlined, is my actual thesis statement, which is the why do we care, what do we learn from the similarity and difference. In Gabriel Garcia Marquez's One of These Days, the pulling of the mayor's tooth is a personal life event that mirrors the public power struggle in this small town, with the mayor and the dentist respectively representing opposite sides of that power struggle. Although the dentist does assert some power over the mayor in this scene, ultimately the mayor's power is far more effective. Thus, this story uses metaphor to demonstrate that a private citizen's power is temporary and ultimately ineffective against a well-connected public figure such as the mayor. So once you have your thesis, you're first going to need to tentatively map out your arguments. Arguments are the subsections of your essay that you need to prove, and each individual argument can be proven with one quote or with multiple quotes. It's easier to understand what I mean by arguments if we actually look at the example that I'm doing with this Gabriel Garcia Marquez story. So here I have set up 3 arguments underneath that opening 3-sentence thesis paragraph. My first argument needs to prove that the mayor and dentist are both trying to assert power. So that's just the broad first point of similarity. I'm going to spend some time proving that. In argument 2, I'm going to talk about the mayor is stronger than the dentist because of their professions. So that's really my point of difference from my original 3-sentence setup. And then finally, argument 3 is going to build off of argument 2, really look at a similar topic but in much closer detail by saying the power dynamic is further demonstrated through the story's subtle details and descriptions of the men. Now, once you have some broad arguments laid out, you know what kind of things you need to prove in your essay. So now you can start looking for actual quotations from your primary sources to help back up those arguments and prove that they're right. The main thing to keep in mind when you're looking for quotes from your stories is that you're choosing each quote because it helps to support not just an individual argument, but ultimately your overall thesis statement. For each quote, you should be able to state clearly in your quote discussion why that quote is important and how it helps your overall argument. You'll never want to overuse quotations, and here I don't necessarily mean that you don't want too many quotes, but you want to think about the quality of each individual quote that you're choosing. Sometimes, for example, it's better just to paraphrase a scene in your story rather than to actually give a word-by-word quote in quotation marks. And this is okay. You can still think of a paraphrase as functioning the same way that an actual quotation would in your essay, as long as it's going to still work as some kind of textual evidence to back up your argument. One thing you really want to think about is, does the word-for-word quote add anything stronger than a simple paraphrase would? For example, if you're going to end up pointing out specific word choices in the quote, or a particular tone of voice in the way a character is talking, then having that word-for-word quote is useful. If that's not really going to happen, if you more just want to allude to something that happens over the course of a couple of pages, then what you can do instead is merely cite those couple of pages with a brief 1-sentence description of the context of what's happening, and then dive right on into your quote discussion. Another thing to think about is how long should your quote be? Now, the question of what constitutes too much quote is not a hard and fast rule, But at the end of the day, a reader and you as writer can pretty much tell if you're quoting something just to fill space and stretch out your essay length, or if you're quoting something because you truly think it's important and will add to your argument. The general guideline is that you don't want to have more than 6 lines of quoted text in a single page of your essay. If you have more than that, then you are seriously stretching the bounds of what is acceptable. You'll also then need to gather up some secondary source quotes. I have another video and the link is here on the screen, and I will also post that link in the comment box for this video online, but go take a look at that, watch that, and it goes into great detail about what constitutes a strong secondary source, where you can look for secondary sources, particularly at Indiana University, and once you go to those places, how to use those sources and how to search for secondary sources. Another quick note to keep in mind here is that I have put the primary and secondary source quote search as steps 3 and 4 in this video, but really these 2 steps should be done concurrently, not one after the other. It's completely fine to jump and look at your primary sources for a little while and then look at your secondary sources and go back and forth, because what you may find is that the quotes you choose from one source will depend in part on what you find in another one. Once you have your quotes, for the most part, gathered up in one place, you can begin to organize them into your actual outline. And the format you're going to use is you're going to list your quotes underneath the given argument that each quote is going to be proving by giving first the page number in the text where it appears, then putting a dash and writing a brief half sentence to sentence long context of the quote, literally what is happening in the story at the time of this quote. Then you're going to give another dash, and then you're going to say, why is this quote important? How does this quote help to prove this particular argument? So now if we take argument number 1 from my sample essay outline, we can see how this is working in some more detail. So in this example, I have 2 different quotes, bullet points 1 and 2, that I have chosen to help show how the mayor and dentist are trying to assert power. The first quote shows how the mayor is trying to assert power. The second quote shows how the dentist is trying to assert power. And then note, underneath my first quote, I have a sub-bullet, small letter A. And there what I've done is I've inserted my secondary source quote into my outline. And what I'm going to do is I'm saying I have found something by an author whose last name is Smith, who talks about, in his essay, a characterization of the mayor's violence in this story. So when I actually get to the paragraph in my essay where I'm going to be talking about this quote on page 2 about the mayor, I will also simultaneously in that same paragraph pull in my secondary source quote and use it to help support the way that I'm talking about this particular quotation from my primary source. So if you're putting that into your outline, that's one way you can put your secondary source quote in. I'll look at some other ways that secondary source quotes can be inserted later in this video. Then notice that bullet point number 3 is not actually a quote in this particular argument. Instead, the final bullet point for any given argument is going to be a discussion paragraph. In your discussion paragraph, you will take the time to review all the quotes, all the paragraphs from this particular argument. Think about how they interact, how they reflect upon each other, how they compare and contrast to each other, and what your general takeaway from this general argument is. In this way, you can think of an argument section in your essay as being a miniature essay within your essay, where the argument itself is your little mini thesis statement. Your quotes chosen are your individual textual evidence, and then your discussion paragraph is a little mini conclusion for this section of your essay. So at this point, what I want to do is actually show you what the full, complete comparative essay outline would look like. So part of this is already going to look very familiar to you because we've already been looking at it in the PowerPoint slides that we've been looking at so far. So first, I'm going to have the large Roman numeral 1, introduction or thesis, and then I give the 3-sentence similarity, difference, and why do we care sentences. I have underlined the sentence that I consider to be my actual thesis that I need to prove. Roman numeral 2, my first argument. The mayor and dentist are both trying to assert power. Well, I've already pretty much gone through this, although note that here I've even included an extra quote. So this is slightly different than the one we looked at in the PowerPoint slides. So I have the mayor threatens to shoot the dentist, the page number, how the context of the quote, and then how the quote helps to prove my argument. I have my subsection of the secondary source that I'm going to pull into that particular paragraph. And then I have my next quote, the page number, the context of the quote, and what makes the quote important, how it helps to prove my argument. And then I have a third quote, the page number, the context, and finally, what makes that quote useful for my argument. And then finally, my discussion follow-up that both characters show a strong will towards each other. So one thing I want to point out here is you can have as many quotes listed within a single argument as you want. The key thing is that each individual quote is going to be something meaningful and useful, is going to back up the argument, and is ultimately going to lend something useful into your discussion follow-up. I'm going to skim quickly through these others because you don't really need to see what the other arguments and quotes were for this specific essay, but I am going to point out a couple little details. First, note down here is another example of a secondary source. In this case, what I've done is I've put a secondary source as the subsection to a discussion follow-up. In a case like this, if you're having trouble thinking about how to compare your quotes in a further discussion, sometimes incorporating a secondary source quote here into this given paragraph can help to flush a paragraph out. So that's something else you can do. And although I haven't actually done it in this example essay, you could also keep in mind that if it's ever needed, you could do something like this. Smith, page 400, we'll say Smith thinks the mayor is stronger. And then why is this important? This supports the argument. So in a case like this, if you come across a secondary source quote that is so meaty and so rich that you really think you could write a whole paragraph just on that, it's okay to list it separately from your other quotes. So secondary sources can be separate like this, or they can be listed as subsections of other paragraphs. Either way is completely acceptable. Also note that in my given arguments, I have different number of quotes per argument. So again, they don't have to be identical, the number of quotes you're going to have. Sometimes 2, sometimes 3, sometimes 5. It's always okay. Then finally, after you've given however many arguments you're going to have, you end with your conclusion. So you put a Roman numeral for whatever Roman numeral you're up to by that point, and then essentially write what your main takeaway is going to be. Remember, your conclusion is typically going to be reasserting that you have proven your thesis statement, but you don't want to restate your thesis statement word for word. And also, you can consider here, have you come across any complications to your thesis or your argument that you're going to end up wanting to talk about in your conclusion? So that's something you can put in here. Also keep in mind that I have 3 arguments listed in this particular example outline, but you can have as many arguments as you want, as many as are necessary. If you end up only needing 1 argument, okay. If you have 2, if you have 3, if you have 6, okay. As long as you don't have so many arguments and so many quotes that you're not going to be able to fit them all into your assigned essay length. And that brings me to this final point that we'll talk about before wrapping up this video, estimating approximately how long your essay is going to be. In general, a paragraph in an essay should be somewhere between a half page to 2/3 of a page long. So what we can do now is we can count how many paragraphs this outline would create, with each quote creating a paragraph of its own. So the introduction paragraph would be your first paragraph, and then we'll simply count all of the small letter numerals. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because that discussion paragraph does count. 6, 7, 8, again, counting that discussion paragraph, but not counting the secondary source because it's part of the same paragraph. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and then finally your conclusion would be a paragraph 14. So our estimated essay length here would be 14 paragraphs. And again, a paragraph should be between a half page to 2/3 of a page. So if you estimate low, estimate a half page, then you'd be looking at an essay of a minimum of 7 pages. If you're shooting for an essay between 8 to 10 pages, you would have a couple options at this point. If you're a kind of person who is very wordy and you think you'll be able to stretch your paragraphs out to 2/3 of a page, you're going to be fine here. You can go ahead and write your essay. If you find that your paragraphs tend to run short and you're worried about that, then a good thing to do would be to come back here and find some more quotes to flush out your list here, either quotes from your primary sources or from your secondary sources. And you can either add additional quotes into your existing arguments, or you could consider coming up with a new argument that will need new quotes that would still fit into your overall essay discussion. So these are the different ways that before you ever even start writing, you can get a real sense of whether you have the correct amount of material for your full essay length. And that is all there is to it. Have fun writing your essay outline.